Batman, thanks very much for joining us today for a chat. I haven't seen you for a long time. It's good to see you anyway. We've had a bit of a chat before we started and caught up on a few things and about all the important stuff. Tell me firstly about the nickname Batman, if you can, because I've only ever known you Batman. In fact, I'm doing some research. I do know your real name now, but until this day, I never had a clue. So how did you become
What,
Batman?
what do you know me as? What's my real name?
Well, I think your real name is. I don't want to give it away because it's so good. Don't want people to
No
know.
problem. And
But
then I'll give you the three scenarios of how the name, what
okay,
people.
all right.
Right. Well, here we go.
Hmm.
Right, Bat. If I would say to you, meine Name, ich bin Batavius Gottlieb Altmann. Das ist meine Name. Verstehen Sie?
Right.
Right. That's the one scenario. The
Okay.
second, I had a collection of Batman comics, the old
Right.
DC comic
Yeah.
books,
Yeah.
with the drawings by Bob Kane.
Yeah.
And kids used to say, and I'd say, yeah, I got the name from the Batman comics.
Hmm.
And then the third one was in the UK, a movie came out in 1960, an American film called The Young Savages. And there's an actor in that. His name in the movie is Anthony Apostle, but he's known as the Batman. He wears a cloak and he's like a teenage hoodlum.
Right.
And of course, he resembled me. So a lot of sort of school friends and that said, "That's you." So it stuck with me over the years. But now I use my stepfather's family name as my last name is Goddard. And then shorten the first name from Batavius just to Bat, so that I'm Bat Goddard.
I haven't heard the Batavius one before either. That's great too.
Well, that comes from my father was an American GI.
Okay.
Met my mother from the Irish Republic when she was here during the war.
Yeah.
I came about from that meeting, and then my mother married a Welshman in 1946, and they changed my name to Goddard. And I grew up in the sort of docks area, the old Bowery area of Penarth, and it was my childhood and teenage playground.
From a little kid.
Yeah, and then in the 60s I went to the States, but and I spent half my life going back and forth. But it's good to be here in Wales, and I've got a lot of affinity.
Yeah.
And both my younger children are Welsh speakers. They'll shout to come right. I'm a dunce at that, but I do try.
Yeah, fair enough. What was your original surname then?
It's Altman.
Okay. So okay.
That's why lots of kids used to say to me in school, and people would correct it and say,
"You are that guy.
You were Batman before you had the comics and that." Because of course, when they'd call a register, they'd say Altman, and the kids would say Batman. The teachers would say quiet and all that, and rap you on the knuckles with rulers and things.
I remember those days. They used to enjoy doing it. I reckon they were sadists. When I had a headmaster years ago, he actually used to warm the cane up in the fire.
Yeah, sure.
There's something weird going on there.
I can remember being at Colgan School, and there were no girls allowed there. Actually, it was just kids, and there was poverty. Some kids that came to school without socks and wearing daps in the middle of winter. And Rocky and Louie was caught putting graffiti on a desk. And the teacher made him pick up that desk. It was one of the big old wrought iron and wood desks, an oak, and carry it across the playground and up the stairs to the headmaster's office, Mr. Thomas. And Mr. Thomas gave Louis 6 on each hand, and then he had to carry the desk back to the classroom. Well, the teacher then gave him another 6 on each hand.
Oh, wow. Blimey. Fair enough. It depends on what he wrote, I suppose. But
well, I got an idea. It wasn't anything too lascivious or rude. I think he was quite a good artist, and I think it was sort of an Indian chief's head or something.
Oh, sounds really good. I mean,
But that's defacing public property.
yeah, I
And
suppose
now
so.
in my old age, I'm
Yeah.
right.
You agree now, do you?
Yeah, totally.
Funny how you become more authoritarian over the years, isn't it? Seems to
Exactly.
happen to all of us to some extent.
Yeah, that's right. That's the way of the world.
Talking about growing up in Penarth, because it's a weird thing with Penarth, which and you above anyone else who I ever say this to will absolutely totally get it. It's always been to me, for some reason, a rock and roll town. It's like a rock and roll town, Penarth. Do you know what I mean?
That came about because it was rock and roll city. Sort of prior to the backbeat starting out in '59, the sort of the teenagers, the rock and roll, we sort of rocked the boat a little bit because we played at a youth club. And what happened there was we were rehearsing in my mother and stepfather's house, council house in Penarth, and the neighbours, of course, we shouldn't have been doing it, and they got loud. So
Yeah.
in the end, a girl living across the way, she said, I've asked Mr. Perry, who runs Victoria Youth Club,
Oh, yeah.
if you can rehearse there. So, of course, we were all too young to drive that, so we carried the equipment. Rockin' Louie had one snare drum, and Sid Patrick was playing on a converted radio that I'd made as an amp for him. And he bought a Japanese Guyatone guitar, and I'd gone to Grimwade's to try and my introduction was I started out, I was more into equipment because I was into amateur radio. And I had a lot of World War II equipment, R107 sets and things and that. And of course, Sid Patrick, he was a good musician. And he didn't even have electricity in his house. And he used to come over with an Egmont acoustic guitar. And we bought a single coil pickup, fitted it on it. And I would play it through the inputs connection on my radio, on the valve radio. And so anyway, one of our friends, his uncle was in the Squadroneers, the RAF big bands. Now, there wasn't just one set of Squadroneers. Around all the RAF camps around the country, there were musicians, and what would happen is the Squadroneers would tour, and these musicians would dap with them to augment them. And the guy was a double bassist. And we were at the house one day, and in the corner was the double bass. And I started fooling around on it. I think it was we had Buddy Holly playing on the record player on a dance set, and what a region tone. And the uncle came in, and he said, look, son, he said, if you're going to mess around with a musical instrument, at least, learn the things, the rudimentaries. So he said, do you know anything at all about music? I said, I know the notes on a piano. And I said, that's about it. So I can recognize them. So he said, right, this instrument is rule of thumb. I said, what does that mean? He said, you put your thumb on a headstock, and where your watch band is, that's G on the E string.
Wow.
And I said, how do I know that? He said, well, you play the first string, which is an open G, and when they're ringing in tune, you got it. So he taught me the rudimentary things on a double bass. Of course, back then, the big bands, they didn't do any rockabilly slapping or anything, but that was my start off. And then it was practically impossible to amplify double basses. I did use an old tobacco tin with a magnet, and then I drilled the lid of the tin and put the screws in for the 4 screws for the pole pieces. And then to keep it on a double bass, I used an inner tube, a bicycle inner tube, and strapped it around the body.
Wow.
But of course, the feedback, even on we were playing on like 10-watt amplifiers and little Watkins Club and the early WEM stuff, even before the Dominator came out. And we couldn't get it right. So Sid Patrick said, I'll teach you to play bass guitar. And I was going to go in, we'd spotted in Grimwade's in Canton, a tuxedo bass, a Dallas tuxedo. And I think it was, the full price on them new was around 12 guineas, and it was 8 guineas. So I only had a fiver, so we went back the day after with the money, and it had been sold. But Mr. Grimwade, I don't know if you remember him, Mr. Grimwade.
No, I don't think I ever met the actual Mr. Grimwade now.
They lived in Penarth, nice family, but he looked like Edward G. Robinson, the actor. Right. And excuse me, and he said, we've got another bass guitar here. And he said, you can have it for the same price. And it was a Rossetti Lucky 7.
Okay.
But the action on it was atrocious. And I was bitterly disappointed. So I thought, oh, no, I'll leave that. So we walked back into town and we went to the Castle Arcade where Stephen Olive Gibson had a shop. And in the window was a Vox Bassmaster in blonde with a maple neck. And I was just taken by it because although we saw very few, we'd seen pictures of Fenders, but they weren't available here. You just couldn't get them. So I thought, this is it. But it was 30 guineas. And
a lot of money
anyway, I'd had this 8 guineas on me. So we went in and we said, can we check it out? And there was a nice, well, I guess the lady would have been in her late 30s or 40, who I assume was Olive Gibson. And she let us try it out. So I said, can I pay £8 on it now, or 8 guineas on it now, and then come in the next few weeks and pay the remainder? So she said, yes, that will be all right. But then Steve Gibson arrived, the owner and the proprietor of the shop, and he said, what's going on? So she said, oh, these boys are buying this bass. So when she explained it, he said, oh, no. He said, you've got to come in with one of your parents and sign a HP agreement. And I said, no, I'll be able to pay it within a few weeks and everything. He said, no, we're not. And she said, oh, let them do it. So anyway, he reluctantly agreed. So the following week, I got up to about, I think I got the payment up to about £20 on it. And she said, look, she said, I trust you. You can take the bass and bring the rest of the money in over the next several weeks. And that's what I did. So there were some good people out there that, you know.
Yeah.
And then, of course, in 1960, Horace Gamblin opened on Cowbridge Road.
They nearly closed down recently, didn't they? But they've decided to keep going, haven't they?
Yeah, thankfully they have. Because Horace and Mrs. G, they were great. Then I don't know whether this will be boring for you, but
no. My experiences of Mrs. G from Gamblins aren't great, by the way.
I'll tell you what started all that.
Yeah, go on.
There's myself and Sid Patrick of the Backbeats again, and we went in and they had a 2-tone Watkins copycat echo unit, and they were available in turquoise and cream.
Wow.
Black and cream or grey and cream, and I think they were in a maroon and cream or some other color. Anyway, they had a turquoise and cream echo unit in there. Now, those echo units then, they were about £14, bearing in mind that a labourer was probably earning about £10 a week. So anyway, we went in and we tried it out, and we said, right, we want to buy this. And because Mrs. Gamblin, she said, now look, I don't want you messing around with things if you've got no intention to buy. Come back with your parents.
Yeah.
But we said, no, we want to buy it. So it was a Saturday afternoon. So we got the money out. And she said, where have you boys got this money from? So we said, well, we're in a rock and roll band. We play in youth clubs and we're booked at the Penarth YMCA and all this. And she said, oh, no. She said, I'll give you a receipt for it and you can come back on Monday with one of your parents to collect it. So we couldn't have it that night. And that was the thing. But when we went back, Horace said, is there anything else we can interest you in? And we said, yeah, we're looking to buy an AC30. Because we had an AC15, which had packed up and I couldn't repair it. So he said, oh, I don't stock Vox, but this has just arrived. And it was in a box. And it was a Selmer Zodiac with the selector tones on it. And the beauty was it had tremolo and reverb, which of course the Voxes didn't have.
Yeah.
And so that was, I think it was about £1 a watt. I seem to think it'd been about £30, 30 guineas, something like that. So we bought that, and that served us great over the years. Like we had 2 Voxes go on fire. One at the Pageant Rooms, because what I did was we picked up a clavioline, the little keyboard.
Okay.
And Les Allen, who was in a Backbeats, he used to play that, but it was a built-in amplifier, probably about 5 or 6 watts, with an elliptical speaker in the lid. And Sid said, that's a great sound, Impacts. It sounds like a saxophone. And we had a tenor sax player in a band. So he said, well, if you could amplify it, we could use it on Johnny and the Hurricanes numbers like Crossfire. So anyway, of course, with my limited knowledge, I thought, right, if I tap off of the speaker and then go into the input on this AC30 that we had, and it was great. It was overdriving the input, so it was distorted just like a tenor sax sound.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, probably on the clavioline, there was probably the capacitors leaking and voltage was going down the line and into the Vox. So we're playing at the Pageant Rooms and the kids start pointing to the stage and we thought, what's going on? And the singer just leapt over. And as he leapt up, the thing was in flames. The transformer had caught fire. He just flicked the switch off on it and they came on with a fire extinguisher and put it out. But there we are. So
brilliant.
I know.
The Pageant Rooms is quite a kind of special place as well, isn't it? Was that the go-to? Was that the place you had to play sort of?
The Marina Ballroom was our favourite down on which became the Pier Pavilion. But I'd have to get a photo over to you. How it became
great
place to be at the Pageant Rooms was that in 1966. Paul Barrett, who was the manager of the Backbeats and the agent, God rest his soul.
Yeah.
Although being a good atheist communist, he wouldn't want me saying that.
No.
But he said he used to take the billboard, American billboard and Cashbox, and he said, look who's coming to Britain. And I said, who is he? He said, Screaming Jay Hawkins. And we had, we loved it. We used to include in the set, I Put a Spell on You, because when I first heard it, it sounded to me like Parisian boulevard music. It was all like, bam, 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 dum, da, ba, dum, ba, da, dum. And I thought, fantastic. So he was appearing at, I think it was the Ricky Tick Club in Windsor. So we got in my Ford Zodiac, and there was myself, Jimmy Connell was a singer with the Backbeats, Paul Barrett, and Sid Patrick. So when we get there, the audience only numbers about 12 people.
Right.
So the management say to Jay, you don't have to go on. And he said, oh, my public are demanding it, so I'm going on. So he went on stage, and we approached him about he had an agent with him because he was being backed by Herbie Goins' Night Timers, a London band. So we approached them and they said, phone the agency tomorrow. So Paul Barrow and myself, we booked them. We were going to back him with the Backbeats, but they said, no, on his work permit, he has to use the London musicians, which was probably just a thing for them to get extra money.
Yeah.
So we put together a show, and it was headlining Screaming Jay Hawkins, Herbie Goins and the Night Timers. Then the Image was actually Dave Edmunds' Raiders.
Okay.
And ourselves as the Backbeats. And I can't remember, I think it was 10 shillings on the door, a 10-bob note. But that Pageant Rooms, that was the biggest sellout it had ever had. It later when Tom Jones appeared there, they implemented a strict fire regulations. But that night, it just, and that's the story of Rock and Roll City. And in the audience on that 1966 gig was Andy Fairweather Low.
Okay.
He often reminds me of it.
Huh. Wow.
On that, do you want me to, while I'm on the trot with this, do you want me to tell you the story about mentioning Andy, about my meeting with him?
Yeah, let's go for it. Yeah.
We're rehearsing on a Saturday afternoon in a cigarette hall on Stanwell Crescent, Penarth, and there's pounding on the door. So we open up and there's two young kids, and we said, "What do you want?" They said, "Can we come in and listen?" So we said, "Yeah, you can come in." We used to run the dances ourselves. We said, "You can come in, but you've got to buy a Pepsi and no interrupting." So they bought a Pepsi and they sat down. So when we take a break, we said, "What do you do?" So the guy says, "He plays the piano and I sing and play guitar." So we said, "What sort of stuff?" So he said, "Well, like you're doing, Chuck Berry." So I said, "All right." So we said, we'll give you a shot with it now. So we get him up and we put the one kid on Sid's guitar. And I think Sid may have just about, he may have had a Harmony Rocket then, but he may have bought the first Gibson. But anyway, they had an old upright piano, and they did Sweet Little Rock and Roller, if I remember. And he knocked us out, this kid's playing on a piano. We said, "What are you doing tonight?" He said, "Coming to see you." We said, "Right, you're on that piano."
Whoa.
We said, we'll give you like a couple of quid. He went, "Really?" We said, "Yeah." And the other one, he said, "What about me?" I said, "Now listen," I said, "get that gruffness out of your voice and get your guitar skills up, and you're in with a chance." Because he was like singing like 9 years old and as sweet as she can be. And that was Andy and Blue Weaver.
Wow. Wow.
And those guys, and Andy once said to me, he said, "Imagine if I'd followed your advice, Pat." I said, "Don't remind me." There we are.
Wow, fantastic story. Another thing you talked about earlier, which I'm going to ask you about now, is your connections with Charlotte Church's grandfather.
Yeah, well, in the early days, a big influence on us on the backbeats were a local Cardiff band called the Solid Six. And they used to play on a Tuesday at the Marina Ballroom. And we'd go along and support them and listen to what they were playing, etc. And the rhythm guitarist playing a Futurama was actually, his real name is Gary Cooper, but we all knew him as his nickname as Duffy. And I'm glad to say he's still with us. He shows up at the Old Rockers reunions and everything. And he later went on to have a minor hit. They changed the name to the Gary Edwards Combo with a thing called the France Liszt Twist. but anyway, I digress. But going back and seeing a Solid Six, they had Melly Jones, who was the bass player, and he played a Fenton wheel bass, which he was the first in South Wales to own an 18-inch speaker, and that influenced me. I thought, what a sound, and I went up and saw him and said, "What are you playing on?" He said, "My amp packed up at a previous gig in an old cinema." And he said, "Oh, we got old stuff here." So he had this 18-inch speaker from the cinema, which they put into a kitchen cabinet. And then he had the Vortexian amplifier that was in a cinema.
Yeah.
So I wrote down the details of the speaker, Goodman's Axiom 18-inch speaker, and went up to Goodman's in London and bought one. And they were amazed. They said, "What are you buying it for?" And because the cinemas used to use them, usually an 18 or a 15 behind the screen, and then 2 column speakers either side. And when I told them it was for playing an electric bass through, Goodman's designed a cabinet for me. But it was ridiculous. It had ported doors, hanging curtains and things. Right, anyway, I digress from that. So Manley was playing a Fenton wheel bass.
Yeah.
And Dusty Miller, who was the lead guitarist, they were both on Futuramas, which were those Czech things. I don't know how to pronounce it now, but they were made in Czechoslovakia and imported because there were next to no American guitars in Britain then. You just didn't see them. And anyway, over the years, of course, the Cooper family, Duffy's daughter, Carolyn, she had success as a local singer, Carolyn Cooper, etc. And then when he reached the age of 70, he celebrated his birthday. He asked if the Sunsets would play for him. And we were sadly now gone Duke of Clarence. So we played there. And of course, Charlotte Church's folks owned the Robin Hood pub, and she was naturally there. And at that time, she was married to Gavin Henson. And anyway, at the end of our set, she did Summertime.
Oh yeah.
In a cappella, she did Ave Maria. And I tell you what, you know, you could hear a pin drop. It was unbelievable. You know, I mean, there's a lot to be said for local musicians, and there's two things that stick in my mind. One is the talent that she had, because I've seen everyone from Sister Rosetta Tharpe right through to Tina Turner. But like Charlotte Church does have that magic. It's there. Even, well, when I was young as well, I saw Shirley Bassier at Cohen's factory gig. And the thing but the other compliment for Welsh musicians was that I was on a gig with Carl Perkins in Bourges in France. Sunsets were down there. And talking to Carl, he said, we had met before, he said, where are you living? And I said, I'm living in South Wales. And he said, do you know Geraint Watkins and Tom Riley? And he was rolling off the names. And I said, yeah, sure. And he said, I tell you something, he said, those boys are as good as anyone you'd find in Nashville. So what a compliment that is, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.